This is the Humans of Gaming podcast, an open and honest conversation about games, life, and belief.
Hello, this is Drew Dixon. I am the chief content nerd at Love Thy Nerd. I had to think about my title for a minute.
Yeah, you forgot for a minute.
And I'm with Chris Gwaltney, who is the chief executive nerd at Love Thy Nerd.
What's up? We are the co-hosts of this here podcast, Humans of Gaming, where we talk to the humans behind games that we enjoy.
Yeah. And I'm excited this week because we have someone I've kind of admired from afar, from the Twitter world.
Drew Crush.
But never talked to. So, Xalavier, how did I do?
You said my name right, which is great.
All right.
One small question, not for me, but for a friend. Humans of Gaming, it's about humans. If you aren't human, is that still cool or?
Yeah, we have to draw the line somewhere. So,
Are you an AI or?
Again, I'm asking for a friend.
I'm asking for a friend. That's right.
Yeah.
So no personal application to myself.
Maybe we could have Alexa on or a Cylon. That could be fun.
Siri, what do you think about life, game development, and belief?
You got to be careful saying that. She's always listening.
Yeah.
But no, Xalavier Nelson Jr. is your full name. That's how probably people know you on Twitter and the internet. And you write for everybody. It seems like you've written for tons of a lot for PC Gamer. What else? And you are most recently working on Hypnospace Outlaw with Jay Tholen and some other folks. And I think a lot of people also know you from Screw You, Bear Dad, which is a great text adventure game that you can play online for free. Yeah, I don't know how do you introduce yourself to people when you frame kind of what you do in the games industry?
Wow, that's a huge question. Mainly because I have an absurd work schedule. So when you say I'm kind of doing something, a little bit of something for everyone, that's basically it. My name is Xalavier Nelson Jr. I'm a game developer, narrative designer, events person, community organizer, public speaker, man. I just enrolled full-time into college as well. I'm so tired all of the time.
So the TLDR is that you hate free time.
I mean, free time's nice, and we're still talking through some stuff, but I don't think that it's gonna work. I don't think it's gonna work between us.
All right, well,
So,
better luck next time.
You just started college. What are you going to college for?
Mainly for piece of paper purposes. Turns out that little certificate has a lot of benefits in daily life. I don't particularly like college for a number of reasons, but and it's also a little bit later in life, so I feel horribly disconnected from everyone around me. But
Can I ask how much later in life? How old are you?
yeah, I'm 21.
You're so late going to college at 21. I'm just messing with you. 21 is not super late at getting into college.
No,
You made me think you were in your 30s or something.
I have weird cultural references. The thing is, I grew up homeschooled, so part of my education was in the middle of the day, my mom would be like, you don't know MC Hammer, do you? And she'd show us what MC Hammer was.
Yeah.
Which turned out to be really valuable because I'm surrounded by people older than myself, obviously. But it also makes it really weird when I'm in a class of 200 ostensible adults, and the teacher says, "Does anybody here know what Die Hard is?" And not a single person knows. It's just blank faces.
Oh.
Oh.
That hurts.
Someone asked if it was a German
my age.
film, and I just died inside just a little bit.
You died hard inside?
The puns are my department, Chris.
But what are you studying?
Apologies.
I'm currently studying art history. That's the current plan. But the main reason that I enrolled was we were like not in the States at the time, where I would usually like typically where people are like, oh yeah, you typically go to college at this time. We were in Italy, and we turned out to be in the alt-right center of Italy. No one told us that when we moved in there, but the nationalist parades.
There's an alt-right center of Italy?
Yes. Above Milan, there is this pocket of wealth and also hatred, which I learned by playing a board game with a neo-Nazi at the local game shop. I did win the game, by the way. And
great. I'm sure he loved it.
I found ways, and the Bible talks about discernment and about a soft answer breaketh the bone and all these other nice little quotations, but those I put them all into practice. It all works.
Yeah?
It all works.
Oh, that's cool. So this was like so how did you figure out he was a neo-Nazi as you were playing a board game with him?
It's a very weird, there's a lot of games these days about detection. Hypnospace Outlaw is one of them, about investigation, about finding things, about like investigating evidence and finding disconnected pieces and things that don't even seem like evidence, and then putting them all together and having that moment of revelation. And I kind of had that mini gaming experience on top of our regular gaming thing, as I just picked up on these little phrases, these nice little, these juicy little tidbits. I was like, that sounds very nationalist.
Did he say "I love Nazis"? Was that
no? See, that's the hint mode. I didn't have hint mode on, and I had this really nice narrative arc where by the end of the conversation, I had figured out that he was a neo-Nazi. 2, won the game 3 for 3, and
what game were you playing?
I think it was an abstract dice tactics game set in feudal Japan called Sengoku.
Okay.
I think I've
and and that dovetailed very nicely with me also figuring out that it turns out he only hated immigrants, so I was safe. He told me not to go out at night because they roam at night. I thanked him for the advice, and I didn't go back to that board game shop again.
Wow. So like, he didn't consider you an immigrant because you were just there visiting?
Because I was an American. I wasn't African or one of the other quote unquote dangerous people.
Yeah. Wow. So how long were you in Italy for?
A couple years. I was in South Korea for a couple years. I've moved around a lot for various reasons, including work. I was recently in Nepal for work, which was a unique experience. And I try to take all of these weird life experiences and put them into my writing. I don't know exactly when that approach began to occur, but I know there was a certain point at which I realized, life is more interesting when you do interesting stuff. Oh, actually, I know the exact moment. I heard about a underground folk dancing ring that was happening, that was going to meet nearby,
as one does. Yeah.
And this was when I was in Italy, and of course there was the temptation of, hey, I can just stay at home. But then I had the sudden thought, how am I going to live with myself if I don't infiltrate an underground folk dancing ring?
Why does it have to be underground, though? Like, is there some
Well, maybe it's like a Footloose town,
Yes.
Did you pick up on that? Did you pick up on the Footloose reference?
I am picking up what you're laying down, Chris.
Okay.
We're on the same wavelength.
Good. See, that was a bit of a deep cut for a 21-year-old, so I appreciate that you got it.
Yeah. You could say my mama raised me right. I had this opportunity, and I suddenly had this thought. What I'm as a person, I've been surrounded by all of these strange things, and I've gone through some of them. But until that happened, I hadn't chosen intentionally to choose the most interesting paths in life that I could. Um, and as a result of that, I ended up releasing one of my most critically acclaimed games, Mazurka: A Ghost in Italy. Um, and yeah, that was the direct inspiration for that game. And yeah, ever since I kind of identified, oh, life is not just more interesting, but you end up having better stories, more things to draw upon when you choose the weirder path. So Hypnospace and all the other games I work on, and all the other projects I've worked on, can just kind of be seen as an elaboration of that desire to go after the weirder path.
That's cool. So how did you get started? Like, right? Have you always been a writer and editor and that kind of thing? Have you always been into that type of creation?
No, it was a weird little branching path. I was too young to be reading an article about Duke Nukem Forever, and in this article, one sentence jumped out at me, that people who review games sometimes get those games for free from the companies so they can do their jobs. And
Yeah.
12-year-old kid reading this going like, what? You can get free games? It was like a revelation. So I decided, 12-year-old, make a weird little review blog, and that was pretty much how it started. The receptionist at Namco Bandai knew my name by heart because I called so much, and I ended up reviewing several games for them, so that was cool. And
what was the name of your blog back then?
Gosh, it's so cringy. It's like, I think it was called Pro Guide for Noobs.
Yes.
That's great.
My shtick.
How'd you spell noobs? Was that Noobs, or did you go like an New?
Give me some credit, Chris. I was grammatically correct here. Noobs.
Okay.
That's good.
Yeah, I had this experience. Of working on this weird little review blog, and that was basically the start of my quote-unquote writing career. The receptionist at Namco Bandai knew my name by heart. I did that for a little bit. Then I had the experience that made me come to a personal faith with God. I had always been raised around it. My family is quite strong in the faith, but it had never really hit until I got a little bit older. And at that point, I started a blog called Video Games and the Bible, trying to see, is there a correlation between this faith that I've taken on, this faith that I found, or that I was given, and this medium that is so important to me. I did that for a few years, and it got really depressing finding out how many games don't really think about religion, and not in terms of like not thinking about religion, but just like, oh, we're just gonna name the bad guys Jesus and the gang. That's fine, right?
What game was that? The name where the bad guys were Jesus?
That wasn't real. I didn't want to call out someone,
okay.
Well, it's not real yet.
And that's the thing. There's so many things that seem obvious to us as Christians as far as imagery. I'll go into one. The Fable series had a tie-in site with a bunch of lore on it for a period of time. And on that site, it basically described the equivalent of a flood myth. And like that jumped out at me as a Christian, but I'm not, based off of what I read, and especially the people who initiated it, it was like it was essentially the equivalent of biblical plagues, and the flood thing altogether, if I remember correctly. But it basically had the three aspects of God, Father, Son, Holy Spirit, through the three villains who were also initiating the plagues for these specific reasons in the world. And that was a big part of Fable lore that I imagine someone now on the other side, someone cranked out as part of an assignment. But as a Christian, I read that and I was like, oh, that's actually, it's indirectly targeting this thing that is a huge piece of my life. And after a few years of that, I was like, are there games that don't do that, that have some more positivity there, or at least don't address it? And that ended up, by that point, I ended up meeting a lot of indie developers who made a lot of exceptional games, including Cargo Commander, which I'll talk about at every opportunity. Cargo Commander, you play as a sad dad in space living under late stage capitalism. And it's a roguelike action platformer. So you're jumping, you're shooting, you're doing all this stuff to harvest these abandoned cargo crates in space. And you're like, this is a pretty cool indie game. And then suddenly you start getting these letters from your family back home. And they're light years away. And there's also the implication that sometimes the company is keeping back letters from you intentionally, furthering the delay between when you get to hear from your family again and you can't send anything really back. So your family's going through some real stuff on this shattered Earth, and you're just all the way in space listening to sad country music every time you wake up, jumping back into the breach. There's all these exceptional little games and stories that turned out didn't have Jesus as the bad guy. And so I spent a few years exploring that. And I actually, by the time I had become an adult, a legal adult, I suddenly realized that I might actually want to leave the games industry. I'd already been doing it for like 5 years. I was there for a lot of the early indie movement. I saw a lot of things that we now consider as like games canon happen from the sort of outskirts, but like just enough on the insides to make teenage me happy. And along the way, I'd also seen all these people that I admired, all these people who were way more talented than me at the time, people who were I really looked up to, just like drop off the face of the earth. So many people got burnt out of the industry in 5 years.
Can you give me some I mean, I think I probably know some of the people we're talking about, but I'm curious if you give an example.
I can't remember a specific example. I would recognize, oh, this Twitter account that I followed for a studio that made a game that I liked and that I'd reviewed once upon a time. They haven't tweeted in 3 years. That kind of thing. It's now, I know it's not an uncommon story. The cycles happen quite quickly, but I started to write around when Bastion and stuff started to come out. So I was in the perfect place to see
which is like the exception. I mean, I think we forget that kind of like Bastion and Supergiant, what those guys did is not the norm by any means. It's kind of the exception.
Absolutely. Right? It was on the,
not just in terms of their success, but in terms of like their sustainability and like and that kind of thing. Like there's a lot of people that even put out like pretty like relatively successful indie games that don't last long in the industry. It's an industry that chews people up and spits them out pretty quick, or it can. And it's hard to be an indie.
And that was what I wanted to talk about. I gave not talk about here. We can't talk about that here. I wanted to give a literal talk at a conference that accepted my proposal. I was going to do a talk titled Why I'm No Longer a Games Journalist, something like that. Why I no longer identify as a games journalist. And the whole thesis was I was perfectly positioned at this inception point in my youth to see all of these people who were like adults. They were adults. They knew what they were doing. And they just were absolutely chewed up and spit out by an industry that didn't seem to care about them personally. So I was like, I'm done. I'm going to become an adult. I'm going to go to college. I think I should wrap up this period of my life because I don't want to see that. I don't want that to happen to me, and I don't want to see that happen to anyone else because it's heartbreaking.
So is that still the plan?
that's the thing. To put that a bookend on that chapter of my life, I was like, okay, I should at least make a game before I leave games.
Yeah.
I started where I had played through Planescape Torment, which was one of the games that was super foundational for me. Its structural design, its approach to narrative, just really clicked with my brain at the right time, and it's defined my career in quite a few ways going forward. But seeing that game, seeing I wanted to make my own final project, I took sort of some ideas I had boiling in the back of my head about a 3-stage game where decisions you make early on define your character later on and either give you more agency or less agency. Some pretty complicated, well, not complicated, but like I was thinking on narrative design levels as someone who didn't even really know what narrative design particularly was, and particularly had never worked in it. And I made my first game called All Hail the Spider God. In 13 days, right before the conference happened, because again, as Chris said, I hate free time and also sleeping.
Yeah.
People really enjoyed it.
And what was this? Like, how long ago?
That was about 2-3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. People really enjoyed it. I documented the creation process on Twitter. I did a Twitch post-mortem, and this happened right before the conference, so me releasing a game for the first time dovetailed nicely with me giving a talk, and I ended up changing my talk a couple nights before the event happened, which was at AlterConf Paris. And I shifted the talk from why I no longer identify as a games journalist to why I no longer identify as a games journalist, parentheses, but I'm going to stay in this industry and make it a better one anyway. It turns out I had fallen in love with making games and with having the experience of communicating with people through story, through interactivity, through all the little vectors that make games such an exciting medium to be in. And I've been making games and not sleeping ever since.
That's cool.
Hooray.
Yay! That's cool. That's very cool. So, like, all this time while you were going through all this, you've still, though, continued to write about games.
Yeah.
Right? Because I still see your stuff on PC Gamer all the time.
I'm on PC Gamer. And, my first freelance article was for Waypoint, but I've since also been on PC Gamer, Polygon, Rock Paper Shotgun, all sorts of outlets.
I don't think we've seen him on Love Thy Nerd yet. That's weird.
I know. We got to change that. It's probably it's kind of a big deal, so we need to we'll work on that. No, I'm kidding. No, that's really cool.
I know that you need more things to do. Yeah. That's why I bring it up.
So like, but I was just curious. I bring that up because I guess you no longer consider yourself that, but you're still doing a lot of writing about games.
Well, I was 17. A 17-year-old saying I'm never going to do X again isn't really set in stone.
Oh, you're just a liar. Okay, cool, got it.
Yeah. Now I'm much more of a game developer than a journalist, but I don't think it would be very responsible considering the amount of it that I do to say that I'm not in games journalism or analysis anymore. But I will say that being a developer first substantially changed how I approached it. I actually think that game developers do some of the most interesting game analysis, some of the most empathetic game analysis and interviewing these days, simply because if you aren't in those trenches, there's so much you don't know.
Right. That was going to be my question for you, is like, how did it change your empathy after having made games or worked on games yourself? Because that's,
Well,
sorry, that's all. That's the only thought I had on that.
No, it's super valid. It comes down to a critical question of, can you know someone's experience if you haven't sort of walked in their shoes? And you can to a certain respect, but there's also a substantial degree to which just your very perspective is changed by being in games journalism. in being in games development. I'm sorry. The critical thing I would say here is that the big part of the reason why I no longer identify as a games journalist first is that I can't be quote unquote objective anymore. I know too much, and I know too many people to truly say to truly make certain statements or believe certain things about the game development process that I had previously taken for granted. And as a perspective, that makes me a better critic, analyst, game writer person in some respects, but it also means that outlets like Love Thy Nerd do this incredibly essential work of speaking about games and game development and game news. Talk to all these different outlets, talk about games, but if more of the people who worked in there were in games, or just everyone in a scenario where everyone there worked in games, it would be a fundamentally different site and relationship. So I appreciate games journalists a lot, but I can just say I'm not a games journalist. I'm a game developer, and that's what allows me to write what I write, but also means that I can't be the guy who writes a really extensive reporting piece, not just because I'm not interested in it, but also it's like, oh, in the back of my head, I'm going, oh, I'm just wrecking this person's entire release schedule. This could destroy weeks of work and potentially their life.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I've been spared from. I've done a lot of writing about games over the years as well, but I think I've been spared from some of that because of like maybe the type of writing I've always thought to do. But yeah, it's interesting to think about it from that perspective because it is well, and also too, I think it's worth saying that a lot of people, like all my friends that were really into games journalism 5 years ago, I can think of like one or two off the top of my head that are still doing it. You know, like that's an industry too that chews up a lot of people and spits them out.
There's that, and also we're seeing this amazing crossover from journalists who cross over to the other side. It's kind of exciting to see how many people go from writing about games to speaking about them, and how many kind of had the same journey that I did of going like, oh, yes, this whole games writing thing is cool. You sometimes get to do really critical work. But man, I'd rather be on the other side of the house. And being on the other side of the house gives me a perspective, a nuanced perspective I wouldn't have otherwise.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. I think like for us with Love Thy Nerd, one of the things that's like the reason I'm still ticking doing this is because I think we've managed to like create a space that feels more, you know, it's not like we're never critical. I want us to be really critical about things in the game industry that are like dehumanizing or
oh, it's really important because there's a lot of those, and there's also it's also important to be critical about like games themselves. It's possible like the developers I know are not just the greatest critics of games, are some of the greatest critics of games I know, but also the greatest critics of themselves. It does necessarily skew your perspective. You can't. I won't say that you can't write scoops, but there is a fundamental break between you. There's a chasm of perspective that just like when you cross that, you can't really go back. And both are equally valid. Both are valuable to this industry. It's just a matter of kind of knowing thyself and where you end up and whether or not you've gone too far to go back.
Yeah, it's not to say that like people who've written scathing articles that have hurt game designers or something are actually doing something wrong. I mean, they may just be they may be doing important work in a way, you know. Potentially, you know, maybe they're not. Maybe they're doing terrible work. Who knows? But that's one of the things that I've enjoyed about Love Thy Nerd is that like we're a nonprofit organization, so like we don't have to do any of that. You know what I mean? Like we can promote what's good and beautiful and true in the world of video games, and you know, sit out on the other parts and speak up when we feel like we need to in areas that are not good beautiful or true or whatever, if that makes sense.
That's one reason I really like working in features. I get to criticize or appreciate aspects of games that I genuinely love, or things I think are valuable to say, as opposed to like writing a news post, which like news writers, guide writers, I don't know how they do it. I appreciate their work so much, but man, put me behind a news desk, I'd be like, we're making another battle royale game. This is a what more do you want?
Yeah. Yep. You can just copy and paste that headline these days.
Yeah.
New battle royale
just
game.
Change the name. Change the
Apex
name
Legends,
of the game.
by the way. This is an unbiased perspective, but dang, Apex Legends is an exceptional achievement on so many levels.
That's what I keep hearing. So you like it?
Yeah,
Huh?
I've heard a lot of people talking about it. It sounds like, I haven't played it, but just what little I've heard of people or from people is like they've kind of changed the formula a little bit, or like improved upon that kind of formula or something.
I'll say this: I've played a lot of spins on Battle Royale. I've played several copycats of Battle Royale, but I've never played a game that felt like a intentional evolution of the Battle Royale format for its own purposes, and that is absolutely what Apex Legends has been from my experience.
Well, there you have it.
Man, I'm gonna have to play it when I get back from Disney. I'll play it. You don't have to build in it, right?
No, you don't have to build in it, which, for those who want to build out there, like Apex Legends, the only thing it will let you build is friendships. So.
Oh.
Boom. There you go. Sold. No,
or
that's
enemies.
why I couldn't play Fortnite, because it just stresses me out to feel like I have to collect materials and build also while like not dying and shooting other people.
Well, there's
competitive shooters in general stress me out. So
the thing I really appreciate about Apex Legends' approach to competition is it comes down to something that me and I was playing with GameSpot reviewer James Swinbanks, and it comes down to something me and him called the trust triangle. When you drop, as it were, from your perch, from the sort of standard battle royale dropship, in your squad, there's so many little neat touches of polish and so on that like signal to me, oh, they've been working on this for a long time, and this was all very intentional. But one of the best touches that they have is that when you jump, everybody isn't coordinating at the same time and talking back and forth and then dropping potentially at different locations. You have something that's called a drop master. You can ping a location for your drop master, but your drop master controls where you're going and how fast you're going there. Basically, they choose direction and they are basically piloting you all down at the same time. So you come in this triangle formation.
Okay.
And the thing is, at any time, including on the dropship, you can break off from your squad and drop by yourself. Or while you're mid-drop with the trust triangle, you can break the trust triangle and veer off to the left or right because you're like, I don't like where we're going, or this is too dangerous, or so on. And the thing is, people who break the trust triangle are objectively going to have a terrible time, because they started off wrong. They destroyed the relationship before it even began. The trust triangle, this feeling of both working as a team to choose a spot, going there as a team, and then the always present decision to break from this even unspoken union that you've made together, is such a powerful one. And it does determine whether or not you're an objectively good person. So don't break the trust triangle.
There you go.
No matter what.
I've been wondering, so I should probably play this game and find out.
Yeah, we need to play. It's on all the platforms basically. I mean, except for Switch. So Chris, we can load it up on PlayStation. I'll play with you.
It is free.
Where are you? Where are you playing it?
I'm playing it on Xbox. I'm a recent Xbox guy. I really enjoy the system and its recent and Microsoft's recent moves and ethos. So yeah, that's where I'm playing it currently.
There you go. Okay.
Well, they killed our feelings with that Super Bowl commercial, that's for sure.
But like, didn't the feelings also rise again? Just saying.
Killing. When I said killed our feelings, I meant it in a sense of like oh, they killed it. Not like, oh, they killed my feelings.
The death, burial, and resurrection.
Honestly,
of the
I already. Yeah. There we go.
There you go.
I just need to have you say things for me. Can you?
I mean, I'd be happy to try. Like, I feel like we're building this really nice rapport. I'm digging it.
I like it. Hey, before we get going too much further, we have a listener question from our very own Kate Katawaki.
Kate's great.
Yes, that is her real last name. So Kate is she's like a triple threat for us because she's one of our monthly supporters. We have a group of people that allow us to do what we do because of their monthly support financially, encouragement, and all kinds of things. We have like a secret group on Facebook that we have them all in, and we just have a good time in there. But Kate's also one of our founders. She helped us start this whole thing. And she runs all of our social media. So all of the social media stuff you see from LTN, that's all Kate. So one of the things we like to do on Humans of Gaming is give our listeners and supporters an opportunity to ask the guest a question. Sometimes they'll come on and actually be on the podcast with us. Kate couldn't do it because she's apparently super important and busy. But she did have a question, and this is a doozy of a question, so I hope you can hang.
I'll do my best.
But Kate asks, well, here, I'll just read the comment. Kate Katawaki, this is in all caps. He is the best, period. Not in all caps. Ask him why he loves puns so much.
So there was a point at my life, again, a pivotal point at which I realized that I enjoyed hurting people. And puns are
kind of like Bennett Foddy kind of thing.
Yeah. That is something I've legitimately said about my Twitter account. It's I make that my Twitter account, my brand is designed for a certain kind of person to hurt them. And the great thing about puns is that you it is I'm gonna make a hot take here, a hot religious take. Are you ready for this?
Ooh, give it to us. Yeah. Give it to us. I'm ready, Pastor.
So puns are the best example of iron sharpening iron, because you hurt someone for a little bit, but they come out the other side better and delighted.
There you go.
I think I just threw up in my mouth a little bit.
So yeah, I was actually also having a conversation with someone recently. Puns have a weird intersection with the horror genre, which I've done some work in, because they are a setup and punchline. Horror and comedy have so much in common, which is why there's so many horror comedy blends. And puns are just this thing where it's like using the familiar, you bend it in a horrifying way, and people are delighted and also horrified that you managed to do this.
That's great.
Okay, so we need you to give us, like, I don't know, 3. Can you give us 3 of your, favorite or recent favorites? We just need 3. Can you do 3?
It's a little bit different because I've changed my pun format recently. I used to do just single tweet puns, a sort of short setup and punchline. What I do now is I use my skills as a storyteller to tell a really long, convincing story, and it ends with just an awful, awful anticlimactic pun. And it's the best thing every time because it happens long enough that people go like, oh, this is going to be a pun. We know you for puns. You're going to do a pun again. And then the scales fall away from their eyes and they're like, no, this isn't a pun. This is the truth. This is good. How does it end? And then it's a pun and it's all a lie.
Oh, man. How can anyone ever trust you?
I've got character references. I've got things I do that aren't abject lies. The abject lies are just pretty entertaining.
So you would really enjoy my church, I think, because every week before our pastor gives his message, he tells like a punny joke. Every single week he has a new one.
I didn't realize he did that. That's great.
He does it. And he's super Bob. I think people that don't know him would come and be like, this guy is so out of touch and corny and lame.
Here's the thing. Just because someone tells puns, I will flag this right now. That does not mean they're not out of touch, corny, and lame. I would absolutely qualify for this title. And the puns don't help.
All right. Well, you can have it. It's yours.
That's great.
Anyway, give us a few.
Is there one can you think of one that you put into Hypnospace Outlaw?
Hypnospace Outlaw has so many puns. Here's one. If learning through observation, through shared knowledge, is learning through osmosis, what do you call learning from stone tablets?
I don't know.
Osmosis. That's an old standby I pull out occasionally.
Yeah, I'm horrified.
I feel the love.
If Crackdown 3 and Respawn did sort of a tie-in collaboration with their upcoming release, sharing Terry Crews, would that make Respawn's games APEC Legends?
Yeah, let's see what you did there.
Long live Terry Crews.
I know someone who actually knitted a case for the new Nintendo console. It's a Nintendo Stitch.
Oh man, 0 weeks, folks.
Unleashed a monster.
Oh man, yeah. So, right. I feel like it's a good time to switch gears and ask you.
Yeah, let's turn that corner, please, yeah. Lord.
So you mentioned earlier that you're a Christian, and that it was kind of a process for you. Would you share that story? Like, how did you become a Christian?
It actually did tie directly into my journey with games and the whole formation of video games in the Bible. I was 15 and I decided to really, I'd always heard that reading the Bible is important, but it always seemed boring.
Mm-hmm. And you grew up with it, you said before, right? Your parents took you to church and stuff growing up?
Parents took me to church. We prayed. We had a very practical form of faith, which is you live out Christ and you live with Christ because God knows you can't do it without him. And
sounds pretty good.
For some reason.
And where did you grow up, by the way? Sorry.
All over the place. Again, family moved around for various reasons. I've moved around for various reasons for work. We in the absence of a stable quote unquote church home, we had each other, and that also had a big effect on my religious formation. We were super tight knit, and I always considered myself a Christian, but it wasn't until I had a personal experience and found basically that faith for myself that it became real for me. Church was a thing that I did. Church was a thing that I was taken to. God was something that someone who I always believed in, but that faith didn't become action and reality until I was basically around 15. I decided to start reading the Bible for the first time just to try it. And for the first time, the words came alive to me. There's a verse that says basically that God is the author and finisher of our faith. And that was when God started writing the first pages of my faith book. That was the first status post. And
that was a good pun too. Your faith book.
So ever since, I've kind of found this. I've kind of had this faith. I've been working through this faith, and the way it first expressed itself was when I read the Bible and I found its personal application in my life. I read a verse and I was like, "This sounds a whole lot like the Dragonborn," and that isn't maybe the most natural connection to make when you read a Bible verse in Revelations, but it was. For me, and that was the formation of video games in the Bible, and ever since, finding personal applications of how does this imagery line up with things I've seen in daily life? How can I use this imagery in myself in my own creative work? What is God's word saying to me today? As I read this groggily at 4 a.m. because I didn't read it earlier in the day because I was crunching on 3 projects, and I'm just like, God, give me something. I need something here. And he comes through, and that really finding a personal relationship with the Word of God in particular has been a really foundational thing for me. Even though a lot of people don't know that I'm Christian, which is one reason that I've tried to bring up my faith a lot in this podcast. I don't get many opportunities to sort of expose that is the reason I do what I do.
That's interesting, because I feel like you're pretty vocal about it. I mean, like the whole video games and the Bible thing is, you've been pretty front and center about that, or have not. I don't think you've ever hidden it. I've always thought of you as someone who was pretty, like, everybody kind of knows as a Christian in the industry, but maybe I'm wrong.
It varies. People who have known me for a very long time and knew me in my video games in the Bible period, they of course know. But as I go forward, as someone who just looks at Hypnospace, for example, or looks at the piece I did about Medal of Honor Airborne, they don't necessarily know I'm of faith. And considering that big part, that at the foundation of all the things I do, the empathy I try to project in my projects, some of my narrative design principles, even if you want a perfect example of how to write combat barks, go to Genesis 30, because it is the absolute best expression I have ever seen of how to write barks, super short sentences that express both character to a very explicit, just information providing purpose. It's an in and out form. Genesis 30 will do that for you. It's Rachel and is it Leah? Rachel and Leah's battle.
The story of Rachel and Leah.
The things they say after they have children or don't have children, like, are such good combat barks, and that's how I'm still finding the.
I haven't thought about it that way, but that's
the application in my life.
You know what I always think about with that story is like the complex that those moms must have given their kids through the names that they gave them, because their like names are all tied to their own personal stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway,
talk about parents passing down sins to their kids.
Yeah. It's like they're all named like son of my morning, and whatever. Like another one's named like, "Ha! I have a baby now. You suck."
And that's a perfect expression, right? Like someone shouting, "Reloading!" It's like, again, God allows me to bring a troop into this world, and it's just like, what?
Yeah, that's one of the things that we don't recognize enough about the Bible. Like, there's some really
it's just purely interesting.
Some really weird stuff in there. And yes, exactly. Yeah, it's super fascinating book, even for people, for some of our listeners who may not be people of faith. Like, there's still some really interesting stuff going on in there. That
I think we don't often enough hail it for the literary work that it is. Like the things that it has done across centuries and centuries, just as a work of literature, let alone, whether or not you believe that it's some divinely inspired book.
Another great example is John. John 1 is one of the most modern interpretations. This is something I only discovered recently. I was just reading myself. I was like, John 1, I know what John 1:1's about. Word is with God, Word was God. And it turns out that in actuality, that first chapter of John rolls through so many different narrative structures for such clear, explicit narrative purpose. It is like a narrative design masterclass. But again, without the perspective of how can I apply the Bible to my life, it could very easily just come across as, here's another story. And that's the point at which faith transformed for me, when it became another story to, this is my story, and it actually applies to me today.
Yeah. And it wasn't any one thing that kind of made that click for you. It was just you started reading the Bible, and all of a sudden it kind of came alive to you.
So the whole finding the connection between my first post on Video Games the Bible was like, hey, this thing in Revelation sounds a whole lot like the Dragonborn. And that was the first point at which I realized that connection with the Bible. But a lot of things kind of happened all at once, which led me to the current state where I am, where it's like, it is interesting that you note that I'm pretty vocal about my faith. I feel one of the other things I grew up around was like people who were very, very excessive in terms of their faith messaging. Like everything in their lives it wasn't like they had like normal human lives. It was like, I'm a Christian and everything in my life is Christian. There's a VeggieTales parody for every movie and I will watch all of them.
Yeah, like Tim Tebow, basically.
And not to criticize those people, but that always...
Sure.
On one hand, it's weird. I want to make clear that, like, I am a human with flaws and foibles, and also this entire life that my faith directly is the origin point and driving force for. But on the other hand, I feel this weird guilt because it's like, I haven't made a quote-unquote Christian game. I'm not... sharing Bible verses on Twitter, really. I share terrible puns, and I kind of want to make sure that that's kind of balanced so that people know where I'm coming from when they, like, if they call out my writing or something positive about my personality. I want them to sort of know where it comes from. So that's another reason I was really excited to talk about this today.
Right. Yeah, and I get that too, like, because I think I have to be really careful, or I try to be careful, and I think there's probably some people that are like, wish I would post more Bible verses or something on Facebook or Twitter, and that kind of, because there's, I think sometimes the Christians around you really want you to do that kind of thing, but I think what we're trying to do, a lot of us, is trying to be good neighbors, right?
Absolutely.
To people. I have a lot of friends on Twitter and a lot of friends on Facebook who are not Christians, and like, I want them to know that I care about them and that I want to start good conversations with them and not just like preach at them all the time. And so, like, whether we recognize it or not, if we're constantly, like, the only thing I'm not telling people don't, like, please, if you're listening to this, don't hear me say don't post Bible verses on social media. But I want, I want to make genuine, because I think for a lot of my non-Christian friends, because I used to be that guy that like constantly posted Bible verses and stuff. I think they felt like I was like preaching at them.
I think there's also the thing of, it feels like when you get into that state, it can feel, at least for me personally, it felt more like I was fulfilling a different kind of selfishness and obligation. It wasn't coming from pure faith of the heart. It was me attempting to fulfill some sort of thing. And I know that isn't the way God works.
Yeah.
I think that's the big question for me, is like, where is it coming from?
Exactly.
Like, why? Why post those things? Is that because you're trying to convert people, because you're trying to put on a certain persona, or, you want people to think that you're really holy? I mean, where is that stuff coming from? I mean, Jesus called those things out in the Pharisees all the time because he knew, these religious elite of his day, that their motivations were not good. And so he called that stuff out. And I think that's the question I ask in any time. If I'm going to post something like that or see other people, is like, where's that coming from? What's the motivation?
Yeah, and that's actually a really good point that you're calling out as well. Like this whole idea that even the people who were doing it negatively, and as a counterpoint, or from not pure intentions, Paul was like, they're going to do whatever they're going to do. Either way, Christ is being preached. I'm in prison, y'all. Like, gosh, do we have to talk about this?
Yeah. That's a good point. Yeah, for sure. Well, I'd be curious to hear, because even though you said, like, it seems like you think about this, because you said you haven't made a quote unquote Christian game, which I think is a weird thing to talk about anyway, because what is a Christian game? Like, is it a game that's got like Bible verses in it, or is it a game that like presents the gospel in some way, or like, I'm not even sure there's a good answer to that question, but you do strike me as someone who doesn't do anything without being pretty thoughtful about it and putting a lot of intentionality into it. So what do you hope people get? Because I think, Hypnospace Outlaw is probably the biggest game like that you've worked on. A lot of people are talking about it. I freaking love what I've played of it. I think it has the potential it's nominated for some IGF awards. Like, it's something people care about, and I think a lot of people are going to play it. What do you hope they get out of it?
To tell that story, I have to kind of tell a similar, slightly different story, and that's how I met Jay. When I was a young Christian, and also,
and we're talking about Jay Tholen, who by the time this comes out, people will probably have heard our podcast with Jay, but Jay is kind of the original. The idea for Hypnospace originated.
Yeah,
with Jay,
he's been the creative director / scope creeper / wonderful human being who I get to work with on this game.
Yeah, Jay's great.
And I met Jay when I was like, again, 15, 16, really young, which sounds weird because I'm already really young. When I was even really younger, I met Jay because I saw all these screenshots and stuff of this game called Dropsy, which was Jay's, not his first game, but his debut game with Devolver Digital that segued directly into Hypnospace Outlaw. And Dropsy is this game about a clown that looks terrifying, but has an earnest desire to improve the world around him and just like love everybody. He wants to give everybody hugs. He wants to make their lives better if they don't want hugs. And the entire game is about expressing love and joy. And that is and I got to play the beta version with Jay. He showed it to me, and I was like, this is revolutionary. This is what it's like to make a game that isn't a quote unquote Christian game and express your faith through it. Because I can't see anything else that communicates the basis of how we live how we're supposed to live out our lives as Christians than Dropsy. So yeah, that I had he had a huge effect on me back then. It really assuaged a lot of my guilt. I might have made like some kind of hackneyed religion shoved in titles before now if I didn't talk to him, if I didn't play that version of Dropsy and go like, oh, there's actually this entire other different path, which is living out the faith and everything you do. So yeah, now we're working together. I'm legal, and Hypnospace Outlaw has this similar perspective of empathy that is really valuable. And actually, speaking of Christian games and announcements, I did actually make my first game that is extremely explicitly about religion and about the God I worship, and it's being put into the Left Field collection at EGX Res 2019. I'm excited.
Oh, cool.
Can Androids Pray?
Okay.
No.
Well, I mean, see, if Chris had been around back then,
JK.
I wouldn't have spent so much time.
I could have saved you a lot of time.
Wasting it on this game.
I could have gotten you some free time. Speaking of that, I don't know if you've heard of this guy, Science Mike. I bring him up. Drew's probably sick of hearing about him. He has a podcast. He's a Christian dude he was an atheist for a long time and then came back to Christianity. But he does this podcast where he just answers people's questions about like science and faith.
Okay,
and
that's
stuff.
cool.
And I was at a live. Yeah, you should look him up. You'd probably enjoy it. I was at a live recording of his podcast one time, and he was taking like live questions. And somebody asked the question of, could AI, like with the, if AI continues to advance, could an AI, be a Christian? That was the question. And he kind of dodged the question. He basically answered the question by saying, we're nowhere near having AI be that sophisticated. But it just reminded me of that when you.
So what you're saying is Science Mike is a coward and question? I'm not.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I don't think that. That's not what I got. But I let the reader understand.
No, that's really cool. That's a really cool thing about Science Mike. I'm glad that there's folks like that around. And as far as answering that question, I'm not. I don't think it gives a definitive answer, but it does ask a sort of more sort of the interesting sci-fi question for me as a person of faith, which is, okay, we've always talked about, man, if robot have feeling, is human? But we've never asked the question, but I don't really see the question asked of, if robots have genuine, if you are a robot or suspect that you are some sort of artificial entity, how do you approach faith? No, with the additional doubt, because people already struggle with doubt, but like there's a doubt of, does this exist? Is this legitimate? Am I pursuing something that is real? Combined with, if I am pursuing that, that is real, does it even matter if I'm a piece, if I'm wires, and tape and code that has bugs in it? So I'm really so getting to.
Dude, sounds like an uplifting experience. I can't wait.
It's very Reservoir Dogsy, surprisingly. And yeah, I'm excited to see what people think about it. Hypnospace, Can Androids Pray.
Have you played? Have you played Nier
Yes.
Automata? How do you say
Automata.
that last part? Automata. Xalavier. Automata. Is that what you said?
Yeah,
Automata?
it's like Forza Motorsport. You know, now that
okay. I'm just playing it right now. I'm in the middle, and so what you're talking about reminds me of that game. I just finished my first playthrough, and
same
now I'm
here.
like playing through again.
Now that I'm saying it though, Forza Motorsport has no discernible connection to Nier Automata.
Yeah, I didn't really get that, but I just moved on.
I can't move on from this, Chris. I need to figure out the connection here. There's an article here.
I forgave and forgot and moved on, but it's whatever. But yeah, so you've played through Nier, or you're playing through it now?
I played through the first playthrough, and I'm midway through the second playthrough. I need to get back to it, but its entire.
Yeah.
Again, this is a game that if you're a very, I won't say legalistic Christian, but if you're like someone who has a stumbling position that is perhaps a bit larger, like this would absolutely this would actually trigger some apprehension. It's this game about where people say become as gods, and then there's the weird outfits and stuff, and you'd be like, is this of God? But it turns out to have all of these religious depth, all of this depth and meaning and layers that can be applicable to your own.
It's super interesting. Like I'm a bit of a simpleton, and so like a lot of times in games, the gameplay is more so like the number one thing that keeps me coming back, and then maybe like story or narrative.
Thanks for telling me that at the end of the
I find with this game,
Chris.
Yeah, that's all right. Drew's smarter than me, so that's why he's into that stuff. It's not that I'm not into it. It's just not usually the number one motivator. Because if I'm not interested in gameplay, like it won't keep me engaged. But I've found with Nier that it's really the story and the intrigue that kind of keeps me coming back to it. The gameplay's fine. It's engaging enough. I mean, it's pretty button mashy, you know, at least for me, because I'm bad. But yeah, man, the story and that stuff is like, it's very interesting. So go play it. Drew, you need to play it.
I know. I've got it queued up. I just need to plow through.
Anyway, that's all I got.
Yeah, there's all sorts of games that have religious applications as well, which is another reason why I appreciate the work of Love Your Thy Nerd. I'm excited about Can Androids Pray and how sort of people react to that, since it will be my first explicit exploration of some of the themes I really care about, both in sci-fi and in my faith. And there's Hypnospace Outlaw coming out. I've got a lot of things in the background that are happening and exciting announcements, but like Hypnospace Outlaw, holy crap! This is the main event right now. It's incredible.
Yeah. So by the time this comes out, it may already be out. What's the window? I know it's pretty soon.
I'd say, you know, as a party that's like, you know, somewhat invested in you knowing about its existence, I'd say, as a guess, from rumblings I've heard, to look out for it within the next month or so.
Okay, cool, great. And where can people find Can Androids Pray?
Can Androids Pray will be at EGX Res. I'm making it with a collaborator, Natalie Clayton, among some other cool folks, which are yet to be revealed. That can't be played publicly yet, but you will at least see it at EGX Res and on itch.io.
And EGX, that's Eurogamer, right?
EGX is the big event that Eurogamer's parent company is behind. Yes, EGX Res.
Okay. Yeah.
Cool. Great. And that'll be what type? I'm sorry, I didn't quite catch. Like, what type of game is Can Androids Pray?
It is interactive fiction game with really cool mech graphics and some interesting flourishes that I'm excited for people to discover.
Cool. Great. Cool, man. And people can find you on Twitter. You're what's your name on Twitter? Rit Nelson?
At WRIT Nelson. If you would like a Twitter account designed for a certain person to hurt them, and you're that certain person, and you've been waiting for this, you can find me through there. And all of my upcoming work. There's a lot happening all at once. There's some things that are about to happen or happening but haven't been announced yet. It's just all sorts of cool reasons for you to follow my Twitter account and also have that. It's an exercise in delayed gratification. You'll come for the exciting, creative, and analytical work, and you'll stay because the puns have you. There's nowhere else you can go now.
They keep on loving you. Those puns.
The puns are lit, as they say. Right?
Great.
They say that. I think that's what they say.
Yep, they say that. Well, I would definitely encourage people to go follow you on Twitter and to check out all the work that you're doing. I am super excited about Hypnospace Outlaw. I played the IGF build, and man, it's super unique. And
I don't know if I should
fun,
be saying this, but
it's a real yeah. Oh, I like it. Keep going.
There's the very weird thing about Hypnospace Outlaw's recognition is that there is this, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, a big part of my development approach is this thing I like to call structurally focused design. Because at the end of the day, if you can have fantastic narrative and fantastic mechanics, but at the end of the day, if you have it wrapped within a structure where people go to a place, do 3 things, and then go to a different place and do 3 things, that core structure is what people are interacting with, and that's where your incredible work can get lost. There's this entire everybody knows that you can be a moderator, and you're an unpaid moderator in this cool alternate universe 90s internet in Hypnospace Outlaw, but they don't know that there's even in the IGF build that there's this big ol' third piece to the game that nobody knows about or has played. So I'm interested to see how people react to the surprises still in store. Even if they play the IGF build, there's this entire other dimension to it that I cannot wait to see how people react to.
Oh man, I wish you could tell me more. But
So
I don't
much intrigue.
Yeah. I'm super excited about it. Can't wait to play it. So definitely be looking for that soon. And anywhere else you had mentioned for people to follow the work that you do on the internet?
No, at Rit Nelson and Hypnospace Outlaw are the best ways to sort of find me right now. Hypnospace Outlaw is something you can Steam wish list. Rit Nelson is something you can follow. I'm someone you can follow in real life, but you'd just be basically staring at my workstation for most of the day and night, so that wouldn't be too interesting.
Yeah. And people can find a lot of your games online for free.
Don't tell them that. We're trying to advertise Hypnospace.
Bear Dad. I know. I'm just saying, if people want to check out Screw You, Bear Dad.
Oh, yeah. I should probably tag that.
Xalavier
Makeswords.itch.io is the current home for my other solo development work or collaborative development work. Canondra's Prey will be uploaded there eventually. And one thing in particular that I'm very proud of is Ellipses RPG. It is a accessible, expandable RP role-playing game framework and set of scenarios. My family had never played a game like D&D before, and they had created a character and started to murder each other within 20 minutes playing Ellipses RPG. So it brings families together.
Nice.
Yeah, great.
Yeah. And they didn't think you were an evil, that it was evil or demonic.
Yeah, no. Because even though ellipses are kind of canonically the most unholy punctuation, I don't know if many people know that, but
don't you dare!
If you use it, every little ellipses is a portal to the enemy. Don't let the enemy into your lives, guys.
Oh, gosh.
You have got a lot of nerve coming on to our podcast and speaking.
I don't see that you're calling it "Love Thy Nerd." ... Because you know better.
Not
Well,
yet.
not yet.
I'm trying to convert Drew.
It might be coming.
Yeah.
I agree. The only thing worse, actually, is like people who refuse to use Oxford commas. That's pretty terrible.
Yeah, I think that's more like we love them. We love them through their own. We love them through. I'm not fully on board with this like sentence, but like you hate this. You hate the sin, but you love the sinner, right?
As I was literally gonna say that, but I just wanted to wait to see if you
Again,
get there.
Chris,
and you did.
we're on
I'm
such
proud.
we're on a good
Success.
wavelength. We need to keep this going at some point.
We are, man.
Yeah.
Me and you, buddy.
Well, we're gonna have to get you. We'll get you plugged into Love Thy Nerd. We'll get you right. We'll have you write something, or I don't know. Well, at least I want to cover. We'll definitely cover your games. We'll start with that. But man, we'd love to collaborate.
Thank
with
you on both fronts.
This has been great. Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for coming on, and definitely encourage people to go check out your stuff. If you want to check out what we're doing with Love Thy Nerd, just go to lovethynerd.com or search for Love Thy Nerd on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. You'll be able to follow what we do. Also, we have a fantastic online community that you can join and be a part of. Just search for Love Thy Nerd Community on Facebook. And when you do that, you're going to want to go ahead and like our page. Those are two separate things. Ask to join our community and like Love Thy Nerd on Facebook. I believe that's it for us here. You can follow me on Twitter. I'm DrewDixon82. Chris is not on Twitter, but you can find him on Facebook.
Thanks again for...
And go check out our other podcasts.
I just want to say thanks again for doing this.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
For sure.
Man, it was great. Yeah, thanks so much. Well, that's it for us, and we'll see you next time.